Now just a week to go until our Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana presents his medium-term budget policy statement. Is expected to answer a series of questions, including whether government will take over some of Eskoms' debt, might provide maybe a final answer as to where government will ever introduce a basic income grant. At the same time, government's finances through a rough time over the last few years, but still, there's been more tax income than expected because of the high prices for our metals, platinum particularly, on international markets. Isaah Mhlanga Chief, economist at Alexander Forbes. Isaah, good afternoon to you. There are so many issues facing the minister. Let's start with how much money he actually has to play with. How tight are government's finances at the moment?
Look, I think if you look in terms of the tax revenues, they're performing quite well. Almost all the major tax items, they have surpassed what the budget has penciled in, especially if you look at corporate income tax. National Treasury has been forecasting for a decline, but we are seeing closer to 15% growth on a year-to-date basis. So that is going to give Treasury some room to breathe. But I think what is more important is how Treasury is going to use those funds given the many competing needs that we have. But I think outside of the tax revenue collections, there is the expenditure side, which is very important. Wages are still quite uncertain. Treasury likely to settle anywhere between 3 to 5% in terms of wage agreements with the unions, which of course part of it is not budgeted for. But I think that can be taken care of in the extra tax revenues which Treasury is going to receive.
So if we have a little bit more money than we expect, is this the right moment to try and do something about Eskoms' debt? And look, the last time I checked, it was still around 400 billion rand, so it's going to take more than one mini-budget to sort that out.
Absolutely. This mini-budget is unlikely to provide a full solution, particularly from the extra tax revenues that Treasury will manage to collect. I think the debate or the discussions have been whether there is going to be some transfer of part of Eskoms' debt to the national balance sheet. The number that has been put about both in policy sectors and fellow economists and markets is around 200 billion rand. That is a figure that will enable Eskom to be financially sustainable. Also, this is the number that Eskom at some point in time has also mentioned. It's quite difficult to see how that is going to be done. But I think we also have to take into account that part of Eskom's debt, about 305 billion rand, is guaranteed by the state in any case. So ultimately, when credit rating agencies assess our fiscal position, they take that and put on the nation's balance sheet. So it would make sense to actually take part of it to the national balance sheet to make sure that Eskom is financially sustainable and can go to the market and borrow on its own balance sheet. It's quite complex. It's complicated because some of the financing from the development finance institutions and export credit agencies come with covenants and different rules which might actually trigger a default should that debt be restructured. So it's not a clear answer, which we hope National Treasury is going to give us more information on how that is going to be done, if it is going to be done.
Our major problem really, and it's no secret desire, is that our economy hasn't grown and hasn't created jobs, particularly for young people. We have higher inflation, very high inflation. We have high interest rates as a result. We have a lot more unpredictability. I won't use the word instability, but unpredictability around the world. The British Prime Minister just resigned after 6 weeks in office. In China, the president there, Xi Jinping, appears to be sticking to the zero-COVID policy and has the backing to do it. The point I'm making is our economy is likely to slow down, right, which is going to make our financial position worse rather than better.
Absolutely. The economic environment within which the February budget was tabled is no longer there. It has changed for the worse. The IMF last week told us that about 35% of the global economy is in recession or will be in recession in 2023 already. And that will come with an impact on commodity prices, which means our terms of trade, which have benefited our tax revenue collections, particularly from the mining sector, but also from the financial sector, because there is a strong link, will not be supportive as we move into next year. So a lower external demand, rising interest rates, as you have mentioned, means the US dollar is going to remain quite stronger, and our currency, alongside other emerging market currencies, weaker, means our cost of imports will remain relatively high. So that is the global environment that we're operating in. And we add load shedding locally is a binding constraint, which means it will continue to hold growth lower than where it should be. So we have quite a lot of issues that we have in addition to the global environment, which means we should not be going on some exuberant spending with the extra tax revenue collections that we are going to have. But as the IMF mentioned in its World Economic Outlook, there is a need to help the poorest of the poor from the cost of living crisis, but that help needs to be well targeted and short-term. It must not be made permanent because it's unfunded from future tax revenue collections, which is what I hope National Treasury is going to table, not a universal basic income grant, but it might likely be an extension of the COVID relief grant that we already have for another year, but unfunded beyond 2024, which should signal to the market that this is a short-term solution. It's not a permanent measure. Therefore, it should not be crystallized into our assessment of the fiscal position.
Isaah, we've seen in the last hour the power of international markets. I mean, you could argue it's the power of markets that forced Liz Truss to resign. It was her mini-budget through her friend, the then Finance Minister Kwasi Kwarteng in the UK, that brought in that mini-budget. Markets didn't like it. She had to fire her friend. She's had to resign. We've had our own experience of this in 2015 in December. I'm sure, Isaah, you'll remember it very, very clearly when Nhlanhla Nene was fired as Finance Minister. Des Van Rooyen lasted. He didn't make it through until Monday morning because, again, the power of markets. It was banking shares on the JSE collapsed by 17%. It was the power of markets that forced a change. How carefully will the markets be watching Enoch Godongwana next week?
Look, markets will be watching very carefully, but I would like to rephrase how you're putting it. It's not the power of the market, it's basic economics. You don't try to stimulate the economy when inflation is too high and your central bank is trying to fight inflation. Fiscal policy and monetary policy must coordinate. Fiscal policy must be well targeted, particularly in times of crisis, where you actually try to help those that actually need the help. That's what basic economics will say. So it's really, the markets are really just telling you that the economics that was practiced at least over the last 2 to 3 weeks in the UK is not what is supposed to be, which we should take some lessons from that. We also had our own fair share. This year, we tried to provide fuel subsidies, but we were not targeting it to the people that need it. We provided it even to the rich people that have cars, while public transport continued to increase in terms of its cost, hurting the poor of the poor. So we need to take lessons from that to say, whatever solutions that are going to be tabled, they need to be well targeted, and they need to have a proper funding mechanism that is sustainable, which is something that we expect from Minister Godongwana. And we don't expect any, something that is that doesn't make economic sense from him, given how he has steered National Treasury's budgeting process over the, since he took over from Minister Mboweni.
Isaah Mhlanga, thank you very much indeed, Chief Economist at Alexander Forbes. Do appreciate it. A lot to look at, of course.